orders, and obedience. The Zarkali prided themselves on order. A warrior's place in their society was defined from the moment they entered service. Each rank dictated by unshakable hierarchy, each command given only by those authorized to do so. To them, leadership was a privilege granted by rank, not a trait one simply assumed. That was why High Tactician Vroth found himself intrigued, but mostly skeptical, as he stepped aboard the USS Valor, a human warship, for their upcoming joint operation. The humans were an unpredictable species, known for their unorthodox tactics, their flexibility in battle, and most curiously, their disregard for strict rank-based leadership when survival was on the line. Vroth and his honor guard marched through the steel corridors of the ship, their armored boots clanking against the floor. Humans, both enlisted and officers, moved efficiently around them, but not in the rigid, structured manner Vroth was accustomed to. The ship felt alive. Instead of awaiting direct orders, human personnel adapted to situations in real time, adjusting their tasks without needing constant supervision. The Zarkali tactician dismissed this as inefficiency. Without discipline, a force crumbled. When he reached the ship's command center, Captain Jonah Ramirez greeted him with a firm handshake. Vroth returned the gesture, though he preferred the sharp formality of a salute. The human captain was a seasoned warrior. Vroth had studied his record, noting victories in conflicts against pirates and rogue colonies. A competent leader, but still bound by the strange human way of doing things. "This is my executive officer, Commander Davis," Ramirez introduced, nodding to a tall woman in a crisp uniform. "And our tactical lead, Lieutenant O'Malley." Vroth gave a slow nod, his gaze scanning the human officers. Each had a role, a clear rank, this he understood. But then the anomaly appeared. A woman, dressed in a white coat rather than military fatigues, entered the command center. Unlike the others, she carried no visible weapons. No rank insignia marked her as a commander, yet the others instinctively made way for her as she approached. "This is Dr. Evelyn Carter, our chief medical officer," Ramirez said, introducing her with the same respect as his senior officers. Vroth frowned. "She is not a soldier." "No," Ramirez said simply. "But she's vital to this mission." Carter smiled politely, but didn't seem particularly interested in impressing Vroth. Instead, she focused on a tablet in her hands, scrolling through casualty projections for the upcoming operation. Vroth remained skeptical. A healer was necessary in war, but they did not lead. They followed orders, treating the wounded as dictated by command. If anything, they were support personnel, not warriors. Still, he chose to ignore her presence for now. "Let us discuss the operation," he said, turning back to Ramirez. The mission was straightforward. Humans and Zarkali forces would conduct a preemptive strike against a Dralnix hive on Darcy's 4, a contested jungle moon. The Dralnix were a brutal insectoid species that thrived in swarm tactics, overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers. If their hive on Darcy's 4 was allowed to establish itself, it would become a near-impenetrable stronghold. Vroth's forces would lead the initial shock assault, hitting the outer hive defenses. The humans, more experienced in urban and close-quarters combat, would move in to clear the tunnels. A simple plan, one that required precise execution and discipline. As the briefing concluded, Carter finally spoke up. "Your battle plans account for force deployment, but not casualty management," she said. "If we're hit hard in the first wave, we need designated safe zones to stabilize the wounded before evacuation." Vroth's mandibles twitched in irritation. "Survival rates will be determined by battlefield effectiveness. If the plan is executed correctly, there will be minimal casualties." Carter's expression didn't change. "And if it isn't? War isn't predictable, High Tactician. We prepare for contingencies. That includes keeping people alive long enough to keep fighting." A tense silence filled the room. Vroth was not used to unranked personnel questioning battle plans. In his command, a healer would have stayed silent unless spoken to. Yet none of the human officers challenged her intervention. They merely listened, as if her opinion carried the same weight as Ramirez's. Vroth narrowed his eyes. "A healer does not dictate battlefield tactics. Carter didn't back down. No, but when the wounded start piling up, I'll be the one deciding who lives and who doesn't. That means I need a plan, just like you do. For the first time, Vroth saw something strange, an undeniable authority in someone who technically had none. Ramirez, to Vroth's surprise, gave a nod. We'll integrate Dr. Carter's recommendations into the operational framework. The Zarkali tactician stiffened. This was not how leadership worked. Orders came from the top, from those with rank. Why were these humans allowing an unranked civilian to question military strategy? As he left the command center, Vroth resolved to ignore the doctor during the battle. She was not a leader, but war has a way of proving people wrong. Command without rank. The plan fell apart within minutes of landing. High Tactician Vroth had expected resistance. The Dralnix were cunning, but they were also predictable. Their hive should have been lightly defended, their forces scattered. That was the intelligence they had. The intelligence was wrong. As soon as the first dropships touched down on Darcy's, the jungle exploded with Dralnix warriors, six-limbed, chitinous creatures with razor-sharp mandibles and spiked carapaces. Their ambush was coordinated, their numbers far greater than anticipated. They swarmed out of hidden burrows, cutting through the vanguard before the Zarkali forces could even form a proper battle line. For a brief, critical moment, the Zarkali froze. Vroth had trained his soldiers to wait for orders, to execute tactics with precision. But orders required time, and the Dralnix did not give them time. The humans, however, did not wait. "Get to cover," a Marine shouted. "Move, move, move." Without hesitation, the human forces scattered, splitting into fire teams and securing defensible positions. They adapted instantly, adjusting to the chaos without awaiting direct commands. The battlefield became a fluid, fast-moving engagement, where the humans survived and the Zarkali hesitated. Vroth's mandibles clenched in frustration. He opened his comms, barking orders to his warriors, forcing them to recover their footing. By the time they regrouped, the humans had already taken control of their own battle lines. Then Ramirez fell. The human captain had been leading a push toward the Dralnix hive entrance when a massive warrior drone struck him down. His armor absorbed most of the impact, but the second blow hit home, sending him crashing into the mud. Blood darkened his uniform. The chain of command had broken. Vroth expected the humans to falter. In his military, losing a high-ranking officer would require a restructuring of orders, a reassignment of command. He expected hesitation. He expected weakness. Instead, Dr. Carter took control. She was at Ramirez's side within seconds, dragging him behind cover while barking orders, not just to the medics, but to the entire battlefield. "Second squad, suppress that ridge," she shouted over the gunfire. "I need a path clear to evac. O'Malley, cover the left flank. Don't let those things." The doctor's war. The battlefield should have collapsed when Captain Ramirez fell. In any Zarkali force, losing a commanding officer meant a pause, a moment of recalibration, a reassignment of rank. That pause was often deadly, but the humans did not pause. Dr. Carter didn't let them. Vroth had never seen anything like it. Carter had been at Ramirez's side the second he hit the ground, moving with the urgency of a soldier but the focus of a surgeon. Plasma bolts and chitinous limbs slashed through the air around her, yet she never flinched. She tore open a med pack, sealing his wounds with practiced precision. And while she worked, she commanded. "Suppressing fire on the ridge, now," she shouted. The Marines obeyed instantly, lighting up the Dralnix positions with automatic fire. Carter didn't hesitate, didn't falter. She gave orders, and they followed. Vroth stood rigid, his reptilian gaze locked onto the chaos unfolding around him. It went against everything he understood. This woman had no rank, no formal authority. And yet, the human soldiers responded to her with the kind of discipline that should only come from an officer. This was not how a military was supposed to function. "Doctor," Vroth snapped, stepping closer. "You do not have command authority." Carter barely glanced at him. Her hands were stained with blood, but her voice was steady. Command is about orders. Leadership is about trust. Vroth hesitated. It was the first time he had hesitated in years. A Dralnix brute, twice the size of the others, charged toward their defensive line, its armored hide shrugging off incoming fire. Vroth reached for his plasma blade, ready to intercept. But Carter beat him to it. "Rocket team, take it down," she barked. A Marine with a shoulder-mounted launcher fired before Vroth could react. The missile struck the brute square in the chest, sending it crashing backward in a spray of alien ichor. Vroth turned his head sharply toward the human warriors. The rocket team had fired without waiting for a formal order from an officer. They had listened to the doctor, and the doctor had been right. Was she leading? It was unthinkable. Vroth had always believed in structure, in a rigid hierarchy that defined the Zarkali way of war. Every soldier knew their place. Leadership was something assigned, not assumed. Yet Carter had taken control of the battlefield without being given permission. And somehow it worked. Vroth's comms crackled. "High Tactician," one of his officers called. "The humans have retaken the southern ridge. They are reorganizing around the doctor's orders." The doctor's orders. Vroth exhaled sharply. It was madness. And yet, his instincts told him the battle was turning in their favor. Carter's command, if it could even be called that, was working better than any structured chain of command could have. She didn't just give orders. She read the battlefield like a seasoned tactician, moving soldiers into position as naturally as she mended wounds. She wasn't just healing soldiers. She was keeping the entire war effort alive. A Dralnix squadron flanked their right side. Vroth turned sharply. "Zarkali warriors, engage." His soldiers did not move fast enough. Too slow. Carter snapped. "Second platoon, shift right. Cover them before they're overrun." Vroth opened his mouth to protest, but before he could, the human soldiers were already moving. They cut off the Dralnix advance with a coordinated burst of fire, saving the Zarkali squad from being overwhelmed. Vroth turned back to Carter. For the first time in his life, he followed someone else's orders. "Zarkali, reinforce the right flank," he commanded. His warriors hesitated. A high tactician taking orders from medic? "Now," he barked. They obeyed. The counteroffensive took only minutes. With Carter directing troop movements and Vroth supporting her strategy, the battle shifted entirely in their favor. The Dralnix, despite their numbers, began to falter. They had lost control of the battlefield. By the time the last of them fell, the battlefield was silent. Vroth stood in the center of it, his plasma blade slick with ichor, his mind racing. The humans had won, not because of superior numbers or firepower, but because they had a leader who had never needed rank to command. Vroth turned to Carter, watching as she immediately knelt beside another wounded soldier, as if the battle had never ended. She had led them to victory, and now she was saving lives without hesitation. The realization hit him like a shockwave. She had done what no Zarkali high tactician ever could. And for the first time in his life, Vroth wondered if his people's way of war was wrong. Respect beyond rank. The battlefield was quiet. Smoke curled from the bodies of fallen Dralnix, their blackened shells cracked by plasma fire. The air smelled of scorched earth and blood, both human and alien. The battle was over. The humans had won. Vroth stood amidst the wreckage, his golden eyes scanning the aftermath. His Zarkali warriors moved efficiently, regrouping, checking their weapons, awaiting further orders. But the humans? They moved toward the wounded. Medics were already tending to the fallen. Some soldiers removed their helmets, laughing in exhaustion, slapping each other on the back. Others sat in the dirt, staring blankly, too drained to celebrate, but alive. And in the center of it all was Dr. Carter. She was still working, still leading. She hadn't stopped for a moment since the last shot had been fired. Blood streaked her uniform, some of it hers, most of it not. Her hands moved with practiced precision, sealing wounds, injecting stabilizers, wrapping burns. She didn't bark orders anymore. She didn't need to. The soldiers around her moved before she spoke, anticipating what she needed. They had seen her work under fire. They had followed her into hell and come out alive. That was true leadership, and Vroth knew it, but he still did not understand it. He approached slowly, stepping over fallen debris, his plasma blade still humming at his side. He stopped a few feet away, watching as Carter pressed a bandage to a Marine's shoulder, whispering something low and reassuring before moving to the next wounded soldier. For the first time in a long, long while, Vroth did not know what to say. She noticed him then. She was exhausted, that much was clear. Dark circles lined her eyes, but there was still strength in her posture. "Something on your mind, High Tactician?" she asked, not looking up from her patient. Vroth's mandibles twitched. He wasn't used to being spoken to so casually, not by someone with no rank. "I have never seen soldiers follow a healer into battle," he said carefully. Carter snorted. "Then you've never been in a real battle." Vroth stiffened. He had fought in dozens of wars, commanded thousands of warriors. The insult should have made his blood boil. But it didn't, because she wasn't wrong. Zarkali commanders gave orders, and soldiers obeyed. That was how it had always been. But Carter's authority had never come from a title. It had come from something stronger. "Your warriors obey you without hesitation," Vroth said. It was not a question. Carter wiped blood from her hands. "They don't obey me," she corrected. "They trust me." Vroth exhaled slowly. Trust. It was not something the Zarkali valued. In their culture, command was absolute. Orders were not questioned. Leadership was not earned, it was assigned. And yet, when Captain Ramirez had fallen, Vroth's own forces had hesitated, waiting for orders, wasting precious seconds. The humans had moved instantly, because they had trusted Carter to lead them. And she had. She had saved them. She had saved him. Vroth's claws flexed at his side. He had spent his entire life believing in a perfect system. Now, standing here, he wasn't so sure. He straightened. "The battle would have been lost without you." Carter glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Damn right it would have," she said. Vroth felt something strange stir in his chest. Respect. He had underestimated her. Not just her, but all of them. The humans fought differently, lived differently, led differently. And maybe, just maybe, they were better for it. A rustle of movement caught his attention. Captain Ramirez, still pale from blood loss, sat propped against a supply crate, watching them with a faint grin. "That," Ramirez said hoarsely, "was one hell of a fight." Vroth nodded. "Your doctor led well." Ramirez chuckled, wincing. "She always does." Carter rolled her eyes. "Stop talking before you rip your stitches open, Captain." Ramirez raised a weak hand in surrender. "Yes, ma'am." Vroth frowned. A captain taking orders from a doctor? The concept was baffling, and yet it felt right. Carter turned back to him. "Listen, Vroth," she said. "I get that your people like strict ranks. But in a real fight, it's not about who's in charge. It's about who can get the job done." Vroth considered her words, and for the first time in his life, he questioned everything he had been taught. Slowly, deliberately, he straightened to his full height. His golden eyes locked onto Carter's. Then, in front of every human and every Zarkali soldier, he lifted a hand to his chest and saluted her. A gesture of deepest respect among his people. Carter blinked in surprise. "Wasn't expecting that," she murmured. Ramirez grinned. "Doc, I think you just changed an entire species' military doctrine." Vroth said nothing. He simply watched as Carter moved to her next patient, already thinking ahead, already saving lives. He turned, gazing across the battlefield. His warriors, his entire way of war, would never be the same. Maybe that was a good thing.